Okay, so we are starting off a bit of a three-way conversation here. We just warmed up with a really cool improv game, which will now be lost to the sands of time and no one will ever hear it because we didn't want to record it. But we're going to record this, and it's going to be pretty live exploration of, well, Arielle and I haven't really shared many thoughts, I think, directly on last Saturday, and I know I have a lot, and I bet Arielle does as well. And then David just showed a lot of leadership last time, and he just kind of got naturally pulled into this group. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Cool. Well, one thing we were kind of, when we were brainstorming like topics to talk about today, one thing that came up is how we feel about being recorded. So
yeah,
I know, David, you had some thoughts about that. Do you want to maybe speak to it a bit?
Yeah, sure. I guess one thing was I'm just curious because I noticed seems to be very important for Logan to be doing a live recording. So I'm kind of curious, like, what inspires that. And secondly, for me personally, I guess I have concerns around, maybe partially irrational, but I notice I just start worrying about like turning our connections with each other into like almost like, is it becoming some kind of product for later consumption? Similarly to maybe the way a tourist might become very focused on taking the pictures rather than actually being present for the experience. So those are kind of things on my mind about it.
Yeah. So I'll start with why I like halfway insist on it. I guess in this journey, I feel like most of what I'm doing is exploring and kind of taking a scientific approach to. I certainly won't be able to get it right the first time, but the endeavor just being experimenting with dialogos in a crowd. And to summarize that, we can talk about that more, although I suspect we're all sort of on the same page there. I feel like my role is to, be a bit of a scientist. And so I think part of the motivation, maybe the more pure part, is just that, I'd like to record this for the public consumption. And when I say this, I mean, going into a conversation without much of a plan with somebody I don't have a lot of relationship with, and seeing how that works. And also demonstrating that it can be done, I think, is the other thing. And then I don't know if I could classify it as motivation, but I'm inspired by how John Vervaeke does it and also how Guy Sengstock does it. They also do, well, maybe it's better to say what I'm trying to do is a lot like what they already do. And I get a lot of value out of what they do. So definitely some mimicry there. And there's probably more I could dig into if I thought about it more. But just to answer the second part or comment on it, I think, it's legitimate to worry about commodifying it. And that's the word I would put to your second or your concern there. I guess the first thought that comes is I'm not worried about it now because it's such a small thing, but it is inevitable that it changes things. I mean, I'm speaking differently than I was when there was no recording. I guess all I can say now is that I'm comfortable doing that as well. And that's not to say that I don't want to have private conversations too. But I'm happy to have the conversations that happen when the recorder is going.
Yeah, I think for me, the concern about commodifying is definitely an issue. But I kind of think it's on a spectrum with like how we are in the world in general and like authenticity. Like for me, a lot of recording is about challenging myself in authenticity. Like I've been recording myself to some extent and putting it online for a couple of years now. And it's definitely like it's a big part of it's about overcoming fears of like how to like, or almost overcoming that like persona ego structure of like, how do I present myself to the world? What mask do I wear? And just getting to a point of like trying to just be really myself, regardless of whether I'm being recorded, regardless of whether it's online, regardless of if I'm just, in my own head or if I'm talking to someone else, and just trying to like have that integrity of just always being the same person and not thinking like, but it's complicated because there always is some element of like, how do we make this more entertaining? Like one thing I said right before we started recording is like, 10% more emotion, 10% more energy, 10% louder. So we are like presenting ourselves a little bit for the audience here, or like you amp yourself up a bit, like you turn yourself into a little bit more of a character. But at the same time, like that almost is like that aspirational, like YouTube self almost, in a way, it almost should be the regular self. Like it's just, it's training an extroversion kind of.
I like that. It's training in extroversion. And I also feel it, I feel like I'm being drawn to a certain kind of radical honesty, or like reckoning with a certain kind of radical honesty, just to your points about authenticity, especially because part of what I'm doing is, playing this leadership role with a large group of people and then talking about the process publicly, that it actually makes me a little nervous. Like if I'm going to talk honestly, for example, about what went wrong, that might ruffle feathers. And I don't think it's happened yet, but it makes me a little nervous to think about that eventuality.
Yeah, I feel that way too. Like in our email thread, I was really nervous. Like there was things that were like, yeah, basically what, like when it like saying that like, I feel like I'd like to have a leadership role in this thing was like really hard for me, because there's a part of me that's like, oh, that's totally like unethical. Like I used to be a big time socialist or anarchist. So I'm like, oh, leadership is, there's a part of me that's still like, oh, leadership is wrong. Wanting leadership is wrong. People are going to think that I'm an asshole. And I don't even know these people, but there's like so much fear and anxiety around that. And I think actually just like getting to the point of like expressing those things, like that's where you find out whether you really are an asshole or not. And like the scary thing about the internet is that if it turns out you are an asshole, and oh my gosh, swearing so much, this is going to be on YouTube. If it turns out that you are a jerk and you put that out there publicly, like the internet never forgets. So it can follow you. And that's part of what makes stuff like this scary.
Yeah. Do you feel somewhat immune to it though? Like to the idea that the internet, that everything's permanent on the internet and they could follow you around? Because I feel like I've started to structure my I don't know, my composure or my pursuits such that I'm kind of immune to that to some degree. I mean, I can be deplatformed. I guess my YouTube channel could get deleted in the worst case, but I don't know. Do you feel that at all? I guess is my question.
Do you mean that you're sort of structuring your life so that you're not at the mercy of tech companies or like employers maybe who could?
Yeah. It's like in fact, just now you said sorry for cursing, and I was like, oh, it's fine. My attitude is just to kind of let it all fly, and then if something breaks because of that, then I'll deal with that when it happens. But just maybe this is just part of how I deal with the world, but I really don't like to be, cowed and told what to do. I also have some anarchist roots, by the way. And it's funny that you and I kind of jumped into this leadership role, even though we have these anarchist roots.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the backlash is like, yeah, that's an interesting question that you could totally like dig into too, is like, what is the relationship to leadership after the ideology falls away? I think for me, when I was an anarchist, I was probably taking like de facto leadership in a lot of situations, which is like actually way more stressful than just having like de jure, like official leadership. Because not only do you have to lead the thing, but you have to like manage everybody's emotions around like resenting you as a leader and like wanting to like feel like they have an equal leadership role, or like, it. I feel like this is a tangent. We were on something. I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, yeah.
We started with recording. That's where we originally were.
Yeah, so we were on recording, and then we were on managing our online personas to avoid like deplatforming, or no, managing our lives so that deplatforming wouldn't impact us too much, which is a very interesting topic as well that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And then we're talking about anarchism and our relationship to leadership. So I guess it's almost like, what do you guys like? Pick your poison: door 1, door 2, or door 3.
Oh, to continue diving deeper into?
Yeah.
I would pick leadership, I suppose.
Yeah, leadership and Anarchy. I feel like part of what we've learned is we tried anarchy a bit. And I don't know how intentional that was on my part last Saturday. But I know partially I was kind of, starry-eyed, like, oh, we'll all decide together. And then it's like, oh, that doesn't really, I mean, it kind of worked, but it's not really the ideal. So that was just a mini journey from idealistic anarchy to leadership, or a choice of leadership. And on the leadership thing, I think just a way that we can maybe frame, because the general, let's say the thing that Arielle or I was worried about, if we're going to come up and say, look, we'd like to continue the leadership role, is that, the nightmare scenario is that the community goes, no, that's, who do you think you are, But I think one thing that we can keep in mind just in general for anyone who's doing this or something like it is maybe, and this could be just a sort of a central rule is if you're hosting the Zoom meeting, you kind of already are the dictator, because you can just not show up and then people have to find a new Zoom meeting. And you don't have to act like a dictator, but maybe just that recognition that, you are a host, quite literally. So if there is any kind of, disagreement where there's no clear community sentiment, then it's the role, it's just by default the role of the Zoom host, the person who's paying for the subscription, to decide one or the other.
Yeah. Also, I really value leadership for being able to create space for like sort of the desire or will of the group to actually emerge rather than get trampled on by other people who are vying for attention or power.
Yeah, right. Maybe vying for attention in a less intentional way as well.
Yeah.
Less conscious way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, that was kind of a lot of my thoughts about this were like, when we started talking about rotating leadership, like I'm so cynical. I've done like so many like co-ops and anarchist groups and this and that. And I just know if we're going to start a rotating leadership thing right at the very beginning, this is going to become an experiment in rotating leadership. It's not going to be dialogos, because it's so energy intensive. And so there's that. And so I just want to be like, okay, let's just do clear leadership. And I kind of feel that leadership should lie with people who have already taken leadership, because even that step of already taking leadership shows that you have some leadership skills. But at the same time, I don't want to like trample on people who want to take leadership, or who are like maybe want to build their leadership skills but just haven't had the chance yet. And so like the way I think about it, like especially someone posted something, I forget who, but someone posted like a list of Game B stuff, and there's an idea that like Game B is cooperative, but it's also still competitive. And so one way I could see things going, which I think could work pretty well, is if we had like kind of a meta container where we did have clear leadership, but within the meta container, maybe there's like it already kind of naturally falls into that. There's different breakout groups, different sessions, and maybe we could have like rotating, like people can take turns facilitating, maybe the middle section of the meeting or something. And then you get feedback on how their facilitation was, their leadership. And that way people still get a chance to like inhabit that role, but the whole thing isn't like,
Yeah, it's not too much chaos. That actually brings me to something I want to bring up for sure. And that is, so earlier I said something about, well, there's this idea I think we're kind of floating around, and I've mentioned it in the Discord of, I think a priority, and maybe this could even be a prompt, which we can talk about a bit, but a priority is what is the core processes or principles or something that we can sort of define early on. It doesn't need to be like cemented, but it can be agreed on and then relied on and almost leaned against, where everything outside of that is up for play and experimentation. And because you have this core to center around and rely on, it actually frees up the play. And as you mentioned, it opens up space. So that idea really stuck with me. It was on a recent Rebel Wisdom video. They were talking about the origins of Game B and how it fractured. And they were saying it fractured partially because they never really agreed on a core, set of principles to rely on.
Yeah, I love that idea of having even to the extent that there is experimentation and more distributed leadership, that there is like at least a fallback leader that we know is like, okay, this person will take the reins if things get crazy.
Yeah. Does anything come to mind for you guys for what else could be in that? Because it's a bit of a protected zone, you know, semi-protected.
I think principles and goals in combination are good. Like what we want, and then how we're going to constrain ourselves in getting there.
Okay. Interesting goals. I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, it does make sense. Uh-huh.
And then how do we arrive at those principles and goals?
Yeah. I mean, part of that process will be calls like this, where we come up with ideas and nobody disagrees with them. That's part of it, I think. And we can choose how much we want to gamble on that. You know, like for example, one of the things I want to talk about is maybe in the breakout rooms, we just say every time you have a breakout room, your job at the end is to decide who's the voice of the breakout room when we come back up. So that, for example, it seems like such a good thing for me that let's try it out once, and if it works, let's put that in this core that never changes. Yeah. Anyway, my point there is just that's one example of one that I personally would happy to sort of insist. You know, we'll see how the response is, but that would be one I'd be comfortable putting in there. But
yeah, just I guess for people who are watching, one idea that we had was to put people in breakout rooms and to have the prompt be choose a leader over the course of this breakout room, and then have that leader report back about how the process went.
Yeah. And that particular idea, it excites and worries me. It worries me that it's too meta and that it will like feel too empty somehow. But that's not to say I don't want to do it. That's just because it does also excite me. I think it could be something that reveals a lot. I'm curious what you think, David, about that idea.
Well, I think of a concern about, I mean, I like the general idea of doing that, except picking a leader, I worry about whether that mechanism will actually hold enough of the signal. Will the selection process be good? So, I mean, I've been wondering about things where, say, I mean, this would be less efficient, but we actually just, everybody become, like we go into new breakout groups and everybody is representative of their previous group so that, you know, everyone's representing it, and then it's more like fault tolerant, you know, through the redundancy. Maybe it's overkill, but.
No, that's really interesting. If I can just like rephrase that. So you're saying you have two breakout sessions, but you kind of remove the part in the middle and you say, well, maybe you don't remove it, but what you do with that middle is you say, okay, now you're going to go into the next breakout room, and everybody in that breakout room talks about what happened in the previous one. I like that actually quite a bit. That sounds really neat.
I like that too.
So we could, I mean, again, we got to just kind of decide and hope and see if anybody disagrees. But I would say let's like pencil that in a bit for next Saturday. I think it's who knows really, but definitely worth a try.
Cool.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be really interested in experimenting with some of these.
Yeah.
Like seeing what works and what doesn't work.
What do you guys think about the prompt of what should be in the core of minimal bootstrap functions? We almost have to, I don't like think of a term for that, but what do you think about that as a prompt?
Oh,
I like that one too.
Yeah, I like it. Don't see why not.
We could maybe start with that one because it's more tangible. You won't feel lost as if we do something a bit more meta. And I don't know, it's not clear to me whether that should be separate or the same as your idea, David. I'm not really pulled either way on that particular thing. Another thing we can talk a little bit about is we have 90 minutes, I think, Nobody, it's, again, another thing I just decided nobody disagreed with. So I don't know how many breakout rooms that gives us. And also, I don't know how long they are. I have a feeling that like the last breakout room should be short. Getting a nod.
I think the leader exercise might be more interesting with a short breakout room, like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Having that constraint.
That's a, yeah. I'm going to write some of this down.
Why is that, Arielle?
Because I think Logan like has a point that it can, well, kind of both of you made this point a little bit, that like it might be a little bit like ephemeral. And like, what if people decide a leader in 5 minutes and they're like sitting there for the next 20 minutes kind of being like, so what do you do?
Oh, I see. If that was the whole thing. I guess I was imagining that there's a topic and also choosing the leader who will represent the decision
right.
on that topic.
Well, I think that's also an idea floating around.
Okay.
In fact, I would like to say unless we, at least until it breaks, or at least we come up with a better idea, I would like to say every time you have a breakout session, you should sort of elect a voice. I actually think we should call it a voice. And as I was talking with Arielle, and maybe you were there too, I don't remember when we discussed this, but I think it would add, first of all, it would make it to where the loudest people don't just speak up by default. When we come back to the main room, it's more that whoever is sort of elected, they're going to have, I don't know. Well, that's a bit of a tangent. I guess where I was kind of going with that is it could just be a natural kind of filter to get people that are a little bit more mindful or better able to synthesize to the discussion.
Thank you.
But also it would also just put them in a role that actually would make them more, they would have a job. The job would be to represent what the group had talked about, especially if you were going to call them the voice, and we could just go through them one by one.
It forces everyone to give more thought to who's talking in the big group and who isn't, instead of just everyone's just following their impulse in the moment. And we could even add like another layer of like intelligence or bias. Like we could say before a particular great breakout group, we could say, okay, so now as we did last time, choose a spokesperson, and this time we're going to encourage the quiet people to step up as spokespeople.
Oh, I like that a lot. That sounds fun.
I appreciate that you both are saying that stuff, because I am very concerned about this issue of the people who are just the loudest taking the most space. Yeah. Appreciate that.
I think when we go back to the main room, at least for next Saturday, I think we should really limit, we should have almost no place where anybody can speak up when they want. Because I think when you have that, you have a fundamental problem where when you're speaking, it's fun for you because you're being heard. And when you have an idea, you'll put your hand up and you'll wait for your turn because it sounds nice to talk to everybody. And you feel you have something important to say. And it's not that it's not important, but the problem is everybody else is in such a passive role. And it's also weird. I think part of the weirdness is that, okay, I put my hand up and there's 3 people ahead of me, but I'm holding on to my idea. So when I come up and speak, I'm actually not responding to what just happened. And so then you have a litany of speakers who individually, the points, there's nothing really wrong with them, but you're not in really a conversation anymore. And I'm
that's an issue
with a lot of that now.
That's an issue with speakers list. I mean, I agree with that. I don't like that structure very much either. I do think it is necessary to have spots where people can just speak up and talk to the group, because if someone, I'm just thinking of the example, like if someone feels like there should be rotating leadership and we're there being like, no rotating leadership. And then they're like, and we're like, no place for anyone to talk freely. I could see people being like, what?
Yeah. Well, a response that I have to that, and let me know what you think of this, is that we might go into Saturday basically saying, look, we're going to try this. We've really, we've decided a lot on behalf of all of us, and let's give it a shot this Saturday. And if there's things wrong with it, let's not talk about it in the meeting necessarily, or I don't know, that even as I just say that, it makes me a little nervous. But I guess let me rather just make the general point that we have a lot of ways to communicate about what happens on Saturday without having to have it happen during Saturday. And all of those other mediums can be totally democratic without any kind of control at all. And because the thing about the Saturday thing is that it's such precious real estate in that 90 minutes. Yeah, I'm not sure whether, well, yeah, it sounds like you want to say something. I'm noodling.
No, sorry, I mean to interrupt you and just like, I kind of agree with you. Like I'd like to have just like 3 breakout sessions and then a synthesis on Saturday. And then maybe, I don't know, maybe we can stay for another half hour after, and people who are interested in talking about organizing can stay on and we can have a discussion.
Well, I mentioned that when we end the call, let's just, we can say, look, if you guys want to continue, head over to the campfire in the Discord. And I think that will, and then that's all free form. And another thing that occurred to me just now is we could actually make the last prompt, depending on how many we have, we could make the last prompt like what went wrong, you know, what would you change?
I don't know, I feel like I would almost want to, my inclination is to have a discussion period at the end where people are like free to give feedback and discuss what they think of this thing. I am worried about veering too far the other way and like controlling it so tightly that like people feel like I do want to like really get the collective intelligence flowing like in a feedback loop, like flowing into the structure of the thing. Yeah,
I guess I do like that idea now that I like it being at the end. What I like about it is that if we can get like the business done, or like we get everything we wanted in, and then we have, you know, maybe even it could be a full 30 minutes. We don't need to be too skimpy on that time. Then that could just be free form. And also, you know, it'll probably just naturally be less divisive and frayed and disordered than the last time, even if we change nothing about the structure, because we all learned what it was like, and we all kind of juggled the same questions and thoughts around. So there will probably be something more there anyway. So yeah, I like that now that you, I don't know, put it out there like that. What do you think about that, David? About a free form at the end?
Yeah, it seems fine. I think I just find that when there's more, you know, when there's a lot of people in a room, I tend to feel very disconnected if it's more than like 5 people. So, so that I probably won't feel very connected with what's happening, but it seems fine. I can see there being good reasons for it. I don't object to it.
Yeah.
Maybe we can like install some mechanisms, like maybe like a 1-minute limit on speaking time. And I'd like to have something where like we're like, okay, so like the breakout room experimentation is done. If you want to leave, feel free to head out. Please leave any feedback you have in the comment sections, because we don't want to have like, you know, 20 happy people leaving and then like 5 miserable people staying and complaining, and we think everyone's miserable. So
yeah.
What do you guys think?
I like the idea of somehow not just shutting off all, you know, speech, all what's the word, spontaneous speech, but rather maybe kind of putting some rules around it. A related idea I had, and this could be maybe not for the whole, like not for every session that everyone's together, but maybe just some of them, would be to say that if you speak, you have to ask a question to somebody else and let them answer. That might, because it would repair the continuity of the problem that I was speaking about earlier, where you have a line of people and they're just kind of saying things that are all independently interesting but not interconnected. If the requirement is, if you want to hold your hand up, you have to have a question for somebody, then there's going to be more of a dialogue.
Right. We could also, yeah, it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. I feel like there's like some kind of balance there that needs to be struck, because I don't know. I could also see, yeah, I don't know.
We could try an array of these things, because it's almost like what you were saying is, well, you said a balance, you could also say a spectrum.
Yeah.
So what we could do this Saturday is play with that spectrum. And maybe it could even be like in the beginning, we start out extremely structured and it kind of loosens as time goes on, that could just be like a meta approach to the fact that we don't really know what will be best.
We could do this, like direct response. So, if David's talking and Logan's on the speakers list and I want to respond to something directly that David said, maybe I know a fact that completes his point, I can do a direct response. But if I go direct response and then like segue into something unrelated, then the facilitator has to be on that.
That's cool. I like that. Because then you can still have people hold their hands up for something they just want to say, but then we could prioritize the direct response.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if
quite a bit.
I was I'm excited to experiment with all this stuff. This is cool because I don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So I'm interested to see it all in action. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I wonder if there's anything about focusing like the content of what's said during that time at all. I mean, yeah, when there's so many people listening, there's just like, I feel like there's certain content that's especially valuable for the whole group. And there's some content that's better for small groups, but maybe it's better to leave it open, but.
It's an interesting question though.
I also, I think I do wonder about this other issue of though, I just noticed that the more people are present, the smaller I feel and the less there I feel as being part of what's going on.
No, I think you're right. I think that's what I feel for sure. And I remember Arielle said something about feeling her energy drained during at least one of the together. And I suspect that's everybody, honestly. Which again makes me want to limit the time that we spend in that mode or find some way of at least making it more continuous. But even if we make it more continuous, I don't think that would necessarily change that feeling that you just sort of pointed to, David. Because you still don't. I feel when I'm in the small groups, I feel held. I feel like I'm really in it, and I just feel more like a viewer when the larger group is going, unless I'm speaking. But then that's just then everyone else is a viewer, obviously.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I feel like in the large group, the problem is people get such a small proportion of the speaking time to themselves, and like you said, Logan, it is often like people say interesting thing, and there's not much continuity. And so it doesn't really feel like a conversation. I'm also for limiting that big group time. I do feel like it's necessary to have some big group time because I also do feel like it is the time when I get the temperature of the whole room. Yeah. And which does feel important.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, as you get the temperature of the room as a viewer, so it's fine that we are viewers sometimes. Maybe one of the things we can do is just bring this kind of framing to the group and say, look, when you're speaking, especially if it's sort of in a spontaneous fashion, just keep in mind, you have an audience of 30 people, so it's not the same context as when you're in a small group, because we do encourage thinking aloud, wondering at I might go, oh, that gives me goosebumps, but I wouldn't really want to say that gives me goosebumps. That would seem inappropriate in the larger group to like hold my hand up and then say that. So maybe we could just point out that the context is different and that we're kind of training to do two different things alternatively.
Yeah, and like one thing that I find works well, even on podcasts and conversations, like in conversation generally, I think it very much err on the side of making like one point every time you speak. Like sometimes it's necessary to make more, but like situations where people are like, yeah, and so I think that with the breakout groups it went like this, and also I think that next time it should be like this, and also I was thinking about like the leadership structure, and then like, people make like 3 points, which is like hot, like kind of hogging the spotlight.
Yeah.
That just like totally puts a freeze on things.
Yeah. So we could say be concise, and we could say keep it to 1 point or one or both of those.
Yeah, I think so. And I liked it also how last time Logan at one point, I think, there was a couple sentences maybe where people were starting to get into like longer anecdotes and like tangents during the group discussion, and you sort of like held that down, like put a lid on that, which I appreciated too.
Thanks. It's an awkward thing to do, so I appreciate you saying that.
I think it's important. And I mean, like anecdotes are great, and sometimes, but I think they're right for the small groups. Like you guys are saying, it's the context.
Yeah. And I also, you know, again, I like the idea of having the last part of the session be more freeform. And again, I also now like the idea of starting very structured, the most structured that seems reasonable, and then loosening it as we go. And another benefit that just occurs to me of that is that if we can keep it structured and keep the energy good, then as we get to something more unstructured, we'll already be on good footing, which would, I don't know, maybe lead people to just naturally be a bit, well, I should say lead the conversation to be a bit better, even if it is a big group of people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm feeling like having this discussion, I'm feeling a little bit self-conscious because I know the group's probably going to see this and everything, but like, I guess I just want to clarify, like, this isn't about like controlling other people or like controlling how people talk and stuff like that. It's really about creating an environment where there's feedback on how you're coming off to other people and how you're coming off to the group. And I'm trying to like create an environment where we have really fluid, engaging conversations. And when we're all building that skill of being like amazing conversationists, and being able to like hold a group's attention and hold a group's interest.
Yeah.
And that's a really valuable thing, I think.
That's a really interesting way. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, anyone who wants to speak up when the whole group is there is going to be practicing this, the skill of speaking to a large group of people, and in this totally new, interesting context as well. So yeah, that's a cool way to put it. It's cool to think that we could all get better at that.
Yeah, totally. And it's like the people who do speak up, like there's a bravery in that, like extroversion, yes, but also bravery. And it's, you know, I don't want to be like punishing that behavior of like micromanaging how they are, but I do want to be, you know, the benefit of having that bravery and stepping up and talking in front of everyone is then you get to have feedback on like, how am I coming off? Like, is this scanning? Are people understanding what I'm saying? Am I on point? And then you get better and better. Yeah.
There was a moment in the last call where I think it was after the last breakout session, and we asked, okay, tell us what your group said. And then I don't remember his name. I really liked the guy, but I think he didn't hear that I said that. And he started saying how he felt. And I was like, oh, wait, now's the time for this other thing. And I felt so bad because I really like him, you know, and he was being very authentic. And I was so happy to see him continue to engage with the group. I was so relieved, like, oh, that's great. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like setting this context also is important, that like what these rules and what this feedback is really about. And then for some people, it is going to be about refining how they show up in the group. And for some people, it's going to be just encouraging them to show up at all, like to speak up, because that can be a hard thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. That feels like a conclusion of sorts. I don't know what time we're at.
We're just about time. I'm curious if David has something to say, because you're just kind of making a face there.
Oh, I'm just agreeing.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Cool.
It's your agreement face.
Well, yeah, if we're on time, let's I guess stop the recording and I guess we can, why don't we just scan our points really quick and just see if there's anything else we want to be on record specifically, maybe?
I'm feeling pretty good about what we talked about this time. Like we can.
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe like give some kind of like conclusion and like tell people to subscribe to your channel and stuff?
Not yet. I haven't sold my soul quite in that direction, quite that far in that direction. I guess, but I can, as a message to the viewer, you know, please let us know how this lands. I think all three of us are quite eager to hear how this lands. And we have, I guess what we've done is tentatively proclaimed several things, you know, and so we, having an anarchist history, Arielle and I both are, I think, a little nervous about that. So yeah, any feedback you guys have, good or bad, would help us, would ground us a bit and kind of put context around this that has happened. So That's what I got to say. But you can subscribe if you want. I'll say that.
Take care.
Good.